Surprise! It is us. It's the Postgame show here on The Game. I'm Elijah Campbell, and I know I said yesterday there would be no show, and that was the plan up until about 6 o'clock yesterday. But in radio, some things are fluid. We had to call an audible, had to channel our inner Peyton Manning and yell Omaha a bunch and move some things around. So if you came here to listen to the baseball game, the Gamecocks versus Davidson Fighting Steph Curry's, that is going to be on the AM station, on WISW. So they're still on. It's just not going to be here today. Last night, the Gamecocks baseball team won 7-1, got a big win over the Citadel. And you say, Elijah, it's the Citadel. It's not that big a win. Well, it's a big win whenever you can bounce back after any type of loss, especially with 2 straight one-run games against your bitter arch rival. That's always a plus. That's always a big win. Eddie Copper got the start yesterday, 4 1/3, gave up 5 hits, only 1 earned run, struck out 6, and did not walk any. That is a plus. Talmadge LeCroy went 3 for 4 at the plate. So the Gamecocks get a really big win in terms of just getting back in the win column. Always a plus to be able to do that. And they're working on that situational hitting. It's something that Mark Kingston discussed with me on Monday. That was Monday, when talking about the stranded runners on base, the thing that ultimately plagued them in the Clemson series. The team as a whole, they've talked about it extensively. It has been one thing that they are definitely trying to improve, and this is Mark Kingston last night after the game in terms of the progress of that improvement.
A lot of approach. I think we've gotten a little bit too full happy as of late, and a lot of that is how our hitters are preparing. You know, coaches were in the office all day yesterday talking about what can we do to help these guys, and you know, it was really a back to the basics approach that we met with the players today, and just let them know that, you know, what has always been our foundation, you know, especially since Monty got here last year, that really has been pushing it hard. We're just going to really make sure that we are continuing to prepare them with that foundation in mind, and that's using the whole field consistently.
That's where they're at on the improvement of hitting. So, of course, if you want to go listen to the baseball game, that is on WISW. And if it sounds like I'm out of breath, it's because I am. I had to absolutely haul it from Greenville back to Columbia here in our studios because I am on the move this week. I will be in Greenville covering the SEC Women's Tournament, and my coverage is, of course, sponsored by Cool Care Heating and Air and Refrigeration. So if you need help with your HVAC or plumbing, make sure you contact the experts at Cool Care Heating and Air and Refrigerating. Check them out at coolcarehvac.com. Thanks to them for being able to sponsor my trips back and forth from here to Greenville. Going to be doing the show with Jay tomorrow. Jay Phillips will be returning to his own radio show tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 6, and I will join him. And around the time that I do get to join him, the first round game, or I guess quarterfinal, not even quarterfinal, second round game, the SEC tournament between Texas A&M and Mississippi State will have been played, because they will tip off at noon tomorrow. And that game is significant because the winner of that game takes on the Gamecocks. And both of those teams are bubble teams. I talked about it with Terry and Tyler early on, and I think that was 1:30, the 1:30 segment earlier today on the halftime show. And while that's a big game, obviously, for those teams, because you want to advance in your conference tournament and you would like a shot at beating number 1, those two teams need to impress a room full of suits in order to get into the NCAA tournament and go dancing here in just a few weeks' time. And South Carolina hopes to dash those dreams, and I have a good feeling they will. I think they'll match up pretty well with either of those teams. I was there for Kentucky and Georgia earlier today. Kentucky coming out with a 64-50 win. A very, very impressive game from Kentucky. Didn't think they had it in them. They've had a very tough season. A very, very tough season. They have not looked very good for the most part. The 2 games they played, South Carolina, like many people, did not fare very well and lost in pretty big fashion. But they came out and they played well with Georgia today. Georgia got up to a 10-4 lead, and then Kentucky took a 17-4 run into the second quarter where they ultimately held on to that and ended up cruising to a win. Asia Petty, the best player for Kentucky, with her 17th double-double of the year, 11 points, 14 rebounds, and her job defensively on Javon Nicholson in the second half ultimately made the difference in that game because Georgia could not score late, and Georgia going 0 for 11 from three kind of hurts too. As of right now, Florida is up on Missouri, 11-seeded Florida, taking on 14-seeded Missouri. Missouri having a pretty rough go at it in both men and women's basketball this season, finishing the regular season's dead last. Missouri and the men are actually one game away from doing what I thought might be impossible, and that's go winless in the conference slate. They got beat pretty bad by Auburn at home by almost 30 points last night. They have one game left at LSU to avoid going 0-18 in conference play. The Missouri girls basketball team was 2-14 in the regular season this year, so not much better. But they are down only 5 right now, 62-57. We are at the 2-minute mark. The Gators have the ball right now, and they could really put this game on ice with a bucket right here. The winner of this game will take on Vanderbilt, one of the surprise teams in the SEC this season. And the Kentucky-Georgia game, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that Kentucky, by winning that game, will play Tennessee tomorrow about 25 minutes after the Mississippi State Texas A&M game. Going to have more coverage for you from this tournament tomorrow. Going to be making hits every time I'm on, the early game or the halftime show or the extra point with Tyler Head. All of my hits are sponsored by Cool Care Heating, Air, and Refrigerating. Of course, need help with your HVAC or plumbing? Just contact the experts at Cool Care Heating and Air and Refrigerating. Check them out at coolcarehvac.com. And, of course, it's not a show today if I don't mention tonight's game. I know everybody's been talking about it all day, and rightfully so, because I think I made the point. Derek Scott made a really good point yesterday when I talked with him at 4:30 that this is the biggest game in the history of Colonial Life Arena in terms of men's basketball. Obviously, the women have had plenty of big games. They had a big game this year on Super Bowl Sunday when they played UConn last year against top 3 LSU, and they're national title contenders every year. So they have huge games every single season. It's not like that with the men. I know they've only made a handful of NCAA tournaments since the turn of the century when this building was built, and they've only been in contention for an SEC title even fewer times than that since this building was built, with Florida trouncing Alabama last night. And that was not a pretty game. I think Alabama really proved that all the doubts about them are very true and very valid. Matt Norlander tweeted last night, he goes, how many games do you trust this Alabama team winning in the NCAA tournament? And I said approximately 1. Their defense is that bad. Florida got whatever they wanted, and at one point it was an 81-59 game. Florida established their dominance. I knew Florida would win. I didn't think they would club them like that. Just because Alabama does have the number 1 offense in the country, that did not mean a thing to that Gator team. Florida's a really good team, and that's the same team that was here on Saturday and got beat by South Carolina. It's even more impressive that it shows how much that win was for the Gamecocks. They're able to beat that team here at home. And because of the Florida win, it means South Carolina, the Gamecocks, men's basketball team, they are in control of their own destiny and can, with 2 wins here in the next 2 games against Tennessee here tonight and in Starkville against Mississippi State, they can clinch a share of the SEC title. That is remarkable. Don't think in this market we can say many times that there is a men's basketball team that controls their own destiny with 2 games to play in the SEC, but now this season, you can. Also, fun note, South Carolina didn't play last night, and we want to talk about brackets and resumes and big basketball games. Florida by virtue of beating Alabama, did vault into the top 30 of the net, which means South Carolina, without having to play a game last night, picked up a quad 1 win. That's a pretty big deal. Mississippi State is at 33 right now. If they can maybe squeak past Nevada, Colorado, and Indiana State, they can vault into the top 30, and then that would make 5 quad 1 wins. The game at Mississippi State would be a quad 1 win, so ultimately you could end up with 7 by the time you go to Nashville for the SEC tournament, and that puts you in 3 to 4 seed conversation legitimately. But that's us getting ahead of ourselves. A massive game tonight. Going to be talking about this all show. Madison Horisic from the state is going to join me at 4:30 to give her thoughts on the matchup. I'll ask her some questions about maybe some of the biggest elements in this game that will be vital for the Gamecocks to be able to pull off this upset, because it will be an upset. Again, you upset Tennessee once this year. Tennessee now still number 4 in the country. Tennessee has a lot to play for, because if they win tonight, they will be SEC champs, at least earn a share of the SEC title. There's still some games on Saturday, so there's still some things to work out there, but they can win a share of the SEC regular season title with a win in Columbia tonight. If the Gamecocks win, then they can clinch a share of it with a win at Mississippi State on Saturday. So both teams tonight are in total control of their destiny, making this game a huge, huge deal. And of course, you can hear everything, all the action. Derek Scott on the call. Judge Manning, color analyst, is going to be with him. It is going to be a fun broadcast. The atmosphere is going to be electric. You can hear that. Pregame is going to start at 6:30. The tip-off will be at 7 here on the game. And if you are wanting to sync that up with your television, make sure your television is tuned to ESPN2. That is where the game will be broadcasted. So that's a huge, huge game, and there's a lot of questions going into this about, how can Tennessee do this, or how can South Carolina do this to Tennessee again? How can they pull off this upset? But we're going to see the 1-3-1 again? I think we might. Lamont Paris talked a lot about the zone last night on Carolina Calls, got really in-depth about it on Carolina Calls. So excited to get into some of that sound. We'll have some Lamont sound. We'll have some Rick Barnes sound as well, because, if you're Tennessee, you're looking at this matchup thinking, man, we let one slip away at Thompson Bowling Arena. Missed a lot of twos in the paint. They've gotten a lot better since that game. South Carolina, I would say, despite that small 2-game losing streak, has gotten better since that game. They're every bit as good as they were when they went to Knoxville and beat Tennessee and pulled off the upset. They're every bit as good. What does Rick Barnes think his team needs to do to come here and have a different result against South Carolina? What does Lamont think about the matchup? We have all of that coming up as you're listening to the Postgame Show. Tonight's the night. The number 4 Tennessee Vols come in looking for vengeance against the Gamecocks, now ranked 17th in the country, with their fate in the SEC on the line for both teams. Both teams control their own destiny. Quick update right now. It looks like Florida is pulled away and has defeated Missouri in the first round of the SEC Women's Tournament, 66-60. That one has just gone final, ending Missouri's season, and Florida will now go on to play Vanderbilt tomorrow afternoon. And, of course, our coverage of the SEC Women's Tournaments brought to you by Cool Care Heating and Air, Plumbing, and Refrigeration. Thanks to them for sponsoring our coverage of the event. Full day tomorrow starting at noon. Mississippi State and Texas A&M. I'll be there being able to observe that one because the winner of that game will take on the Gamecocks on Friday. Tennessee and Kentucky at 2:30. At 8:30 will be Vanderbilt and Florida. And at 6 o'clock, Auburn and Arkansas. So a full slate of games tomorrow in Greenville. Some real exciting stuff. We're getting into this game right now. We'll keep you updated if anything else happens. For the SEC Women's Tournament, I know those are the final games today, but we'll revisit the results from today later on in the show when we take a drive around the SEC. But Lamont Paris was on Carolina Calls last night, and they went deep into this matchup of things they need to do to be able to beat Tennessee. And one thing that I was interested in was he was asked about the potential of using the 1-3-1 defensive zone. For those who observed that in the Florida game, they deployed the 1-3-1 zone down 6 points with about 11 minutes left in the game. They completely erased that deficit. Within the first 9 Florida possessions, South Carolina forced 5 turnovers. There were 5 points scored, but those were also on late shots in the shot clock. A Tyree Samuel floater late in the shot clock. A Zion Poland deep 3 with a hand in his face with 2 seconds to go on the shot clock. The first 9 possessions of that zone altered the game for South Carolina, and Florida didn't know what to do with it. Lamont was asked about it last night in terms of, is this something that we're going to be able to see more? And maybe do we see a little bit of it against Tennessee?
Good question. I mean, ultimately, I think I'd like to use it some in most games. But, you look at the Tennessee game the last time we played them, we held them to 59 points, right? And that's with Dalton Connect getting a relatively inefficient 31 points in that game. So I'm not going to just throw it out there to throw it out there when, if it ain't broke, they say, right? And so when we're playing well, I don't want to just do it there's an obligation to do it. I want to do it when I think it makes sense. They're driving a lot. We get in foul trouble. That's the other. We've used it in a couple other games where we were able to. Colin Boyles had fouls. And just with the flow of the game, I felt like we needed him back in there. And we were able to play some 1-3-1, which you're not going to typically foul quite as much, and protect a couple guys from fouls and still keep them on the floor for what they do offensively.
So it's going to be situational. If Zakai Ziegler is able to get whatever he wants off the bounce and he's able to create paint touches and Tennessee's knocking kick-out threes, then you might see them go into the 1-3-1. One thing he didn't mention there that I thought was really helpful in the Florida game was you go look at the first half of the Florida game and the first 9 minutes of the second half. Walter Clayton and Zion Poland were able to get into the paint at will off the dribble. Their guards drive aggressively. And if you watched the game last night between Florida and Alabama, Florida got their money's worth in the paint because of the dribble drive from their guards. Yes, they have the 10th biggest team in college basketball. Yes, they play 2 dudes that are at least 6'11 or taller on at over 50% of their possessions in the last 6 games. But Florida's offense was generated through the movement of their guards and those guys being able to get into the paint. And they were able to do that against South Carolina. To Florida's credit, they did a really good job. But once that 1-3-1 was deployed and Zach Davis was over at half court, basically cornering them into one subsection of the floor, Florida, instead of going north-south with their drives, they were passing the ball east-west. Todd Golden, after the game, when I asked him about why that was so problematic for them, he said they had to stop and think. It slowed them down. And it didn't just slow them down physically to where they had to space themselves out a little more and figure out where to attack in the zone. it slowed them down mentally because it made them think a little bit more. It made the passes that they made less crisp. Instead of maybe moving it to the other side of the floor with relative ease, you have to lob it over Zach Davis to be able to get there. And ultimately, those long passes add up in the shot clock, which is one of the reasons why not only did they turn the ball over more, the 2 shots they actually made, they still had to get off relatively quickly because it happened late in the shot clock. That's what a 1-3-1 does. A 1-3-1 makes you have to throw lob passes from one side to the other. It gives time for your defense to be able to rotate. And yeah, sure, if you just look at it, yeah, there's going to be corner threes available. And those are the most efficient three-point shots in the sport. But it's easier said than done than getting it there. Lamont kind of compared the 1-3-1 to a 2-3, and a lot of teams will deploy 2-3 zones. Lamont, I know from experience, does not like playing 2-3 at all. I kind of have a theory that if you ever see a Lamont Paris team run a 2-3 zone, he might be held hostage, and we might have to call for some backup and get some help because he does not want to do it. He compared a little bit of those two last night on Carolina Calls and got a pretty interesting response.
It's been effective. I like the 1-3-1 versus the 2-3 because while the 1-3-1 is more difficult to teach and to get good at, it's also harder to attack. I think you can be better at the moves and rotations in a 2-3, but every team without practicing has a 2-3 attack. Very few have a 1-3-1. Now the only downside is that now I can guarantee you there are 13 SEC teams that between now and the time that we land in Nashville are spending time on their 1-3-1 attack. That's for sure.
That's true. And that also, while he's right, teams now know you're going to deploy that if they're giving up that dribble drive into the paint and you're getting paint touches on South Carolina, yes, you should probably expect a 1-3-1 later on in the game. But when you have precious practice time, especially in a tournament setting where the turnover from game to game is day to day, that's harder to do. Yes, you might see that on film, and if you've never really played against a team that runs something like that, it's going to be really difficult to get your team comfortable doing it in the limited time you have on the floor in practice when you get to Nashville. South Carolina will have the double bye. The team that's going to play them in the first round has to win a game the night before that. So they're going to win that game the night before that, whoever it is, and they're going to have to look at the film overnight and say, wow, okay, this is what they run. You don't have practice time from that night to the next night. You can show your team, hey, this is what they're doing, this is their defense, but you can't get guys on the floor to practice it 100%. You have to have a plan in place already. It's going to be hard. That can be sustainable in a tournament-type setting, especially the SEC tournament. The NCAA, it's a little different because you do get maybe an extra day in between your games, but the 1-3-1 where I think it's really going to help the South Carolina team the most is in the SEC tournament setting, where another team doesn't have a couple hours in between the games to be able to practice going up against it. Maybe you can surprise them with it about 15 minutes to go in the second half, and that's where you're going to have maybe a 9-possession stretch like you had in the Florida game that can ultimately turn a game upside down. We saw what it did here at CLA. We saw what it did against Georgia at Stegman early on in the year when they got their revenge against the Georgia Bulldogs. And I think we're going to see that a lot more in Nashville because, yes, while Lamont is true, teams are going to know you do it. Your time to prepare for that specifically is a lot more limited from now to the time you know you're going to have to play South Carolina in the SEC tournament. Dalton Knecht is going to be the biggest key for Tennessee to win this game. In most of the games Tennessee wins this year, he goes bananas. He scored 30 points in a lot of games. In one of their biggest games of the year, just last week, he scored 25 points in the last 12 minutes against Auburn to steal a win when it looked like Auburn was getting ready to cause some separation. How can the Gamecocks slow down Dalton Knecht to where he doesn't go for 30 and still doesn't beat you? Lamont was asked that last night on Carolina Calls. We'll get into his answer as the postgame show continues. Getting you set for tonight's big game between Tennessee and South Carolina at Colonial Life Arena. Excited to be in the house tonight. A huge game for many reasons. South Carolina can control their destiny and be halfway there to a share of an SEC title if they could seal the deal against Mississippi State. Tennessee will get a share of the SEC title regardless if they win tonight at CLA. So there's a lot on the line. It'd be another quad one win for South Carolina. And after Florida picked up a win against Alabama last night, that's a quad one win now that Florida's in the top 30 of the net. So within 2 days, you can pick up 2 quad one wins in terms of improving your seeding. But what we're really focused about tonight is the task at hand against Tennessee. But the big thing is when you look at this Vols team, the biggest difference between this year and maybe the last 3 or 4, because they have several stalwart pieces on that team that have been anchors in building block players for the last few years, and they've all utilized the COVID year. I joked with Joe Rexrode yesterday from The Athletic that it feels like Josiah Jordan-James and Santiago Vescovi have been playing at Tennessee since Allen Houston was at Tennessee. These guys have seemingly been there forever, and you can't convince me that those 2 dudes are not 30 years old. But they're not, and this is their last year of eligibility. But the biggest difference between that group of guys in the last few years for Tennessee and this year is Dalton Knecht, the transfer from Northern Colorado, the guy who has vaulted himself into an obvious first-team All-American selection and is going to make some voters think about the Wooden Award and National Player of the Year award. I, as someone who has a vote for the Oscar Robertson Award, will actually maybe think a little bit about giving it to Zach Edey instead of just being like, well, he's been the dominant big man on one of the best teams in college basketball this year. He's the player of the year. Spoiler alert, he is the best player in college basketball. His numbers are better than last year. That's a whole different discussion. But you know what? Dalton Knecht has made it a discussion, and that's a huge credit to him. But how does South Carolina slow him down? That's the question. In the win that you had against Tennessee back on January 30th, you didn't necessarily slow him down. He scored 31 points, and a lot of that came late in the game. You slowed him down for maybe the first, 35 minutes of the game, but he almost single-handedly brought them back the same way he brought them back against Auburn. How can you avoid him going over 30? It's not going to be the biggest key to the game because even when he scores under 20 points, the Vols are still 13-2 in those games. So limiting Dalton Knecht to under 20 points, which is a fair goal, isn't going to guarantee that you're going to win the game, but it certainly will increase your odds. And at least will certainly force other players like Vescovi and James and Zakai Ziegler to be able to outscore you and be able to pick up that slack. South Carolina is really good at making you do things you don't want to do. And I can assure you that's something that Tennessee does not want to do, is having to rely on other non-Knecht scores. They can, they just don't want to. But how do you get Dalton Knecht to maybe not go bananas like he did on Auburn? Lamont was asked about that last night. The biggest ways to stop him, here is Coach Paris's response.
I don't care who scores on my team, and I can't control who shoots on the other team. We can do some things to try to limit this or that. I can't control. If they want to have him shoot 40 times, he's probably going to score 45 points. And that would be the narrative, right? Dalton Knecht scores 45 points on 40 shots. That's not that efficient. So I think we did a good job of staying between him and the rim. We wanted to eliminate a couple things. Eliminate layups. Just sounds pretty basic, right? It's harder to do than it is to say. Eliminate layups, eliminate transition buckets for him. I think he did have 2 points in transition, and then eliminate stare down threes. Make him shoot his threes off the move. He can make all those. There's no shot that he can't make. Right. There's just some that he's going to be more likely to make, and he's going to be more comfortable. So I thought we did a good job with that. He also missed a couple that he might make normally. A couple tough pull-ups in the middle of the paint. This guy's a player. He's a real offensive weapon, and he's going to make some of those. But you just want guys to work for the points that they do get. More importantly than the job we did on him, I think you had Zakai Ziegler had 2 points. Jonas Adu, I don't know how many points he had, but it wasn't a lot. He had 6 in that game, right? Those are 2 key cogs for them. So while we're talking about what Dalton Connect does, I've mentioned this before. There's a world in which Dalton Connect scores 9 points and they score 80. There's also, and they win that one probably. There's also a world in which he scores 31 and they're held to 59, one of their lowest on the entire season.
Right.
And they probably don't win that one. So I don't care who shoots for that team or who scores. I'm worried about the total body of work.
I love the response from Coach Paris, where you can't control what the other team does. You know, you can maybe encourage them to do certain things. Like South Carolina is one of the best in the SEC, if not the best, at getting teams to shoot mid-range jumpers. Now, they can't hold a gun to their head and say, hey, you're going to shoot this 16-footer from the elbow and you're going to do this 30 times tonight. But what they can do is maybe run you off the line and maybe have your backline and your defense rotate well enough to where you can take away certain parts of the paint and the rim, and then maybe force you to think that your best option is a pull-up jumper. It worked masterfully in both games against Ole Miss, and doesn't help that Ole Miss hunts out those types of shots. They're inefficient shots, and it showed that South Carolina won in both games because they tested the theory that if you make a team shoot a lot of inefficient shots, your chances of winning are going to be really high. When it comes to Dalton Connect, Lamont mentioned something that is the bread and butter of Connect's game, and that's the pull-up jumper. He's really good off the catch, and he's a really great three-point shooter. He's a 40% three-point shooter, and he's hoisted up over 160 this year. So you have a large sample size with an elite percentage. A lot of that's off the dribble, and that's really tough to do. But he also likes to pull up and shoot the far two in the mid-range jumper. He shoots almost as many far twos as anybody else on the team. Jonas Adu actually has one more attempted far two than Dalton Connect, according to Bart Torvik. And when you look at this, his percentages, Dalton Connect is a 40.2% shooter on the far two, the mid-range jumper. He's a 40.2% three-point jumper. And I did the math on the 92 long two attempts from Dalton Connect this year. He's made 37. That is 0.8 points per shot. That is not very efficient at all. You want him to be able to shoot those shots. Dalton Connect also hunts out those shots. If you go back and look at the Auburn game, anytime Janai Broom was switched out on him, he knew he could take him off the dribble. A couple times he got to the rim and flushed one. You want to avoid that. If you get a mismatch on Connect, you want to make sure you have somewhat of a rim protector back there to discourage him from flying up and putting his armpits in the rim. And maybe encourage him to pull up and shoot from 15 to where that percentage of him making a dunk, which he's 91.7% on this year, make that 91% attempt a 40% attempt. South Carolina does a good enough job of anybody else in the country, whether it's Michi Johnson or Talon Cooper on the ball, or maybe getting screened and not staying screened, stay in front of their man, or Zach Davis. I think Zach Davis is probably going to be able to draw the Dalton Connect assignment tonight, and Zach does a really good job in games of not staying screened. Tennessee loves using the ball screen to get those mismatches that they got against Auburn. And if Dalton Connect feels like he has that, he is not afraid to pull up and shoot a mid-range jumper. That's a guy who I've read from The Athletic models his game after Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant gets a lot of his buckets that way from pounding the air out of the ball and getting to his certain spots on the floor. You want Connect to want to do that. I think South Carolina has a really good chance of making sure he doesn't score 40 or 31 like he did the other night, or 37 like he's done at some points this year. I think you can keep him in check, and I think they're going to be able to at least make him hit tough jumpers. Whether or not he hits them, like Lamont said, you have no control over. But the thing that South Carolina defense does has control over is making him shoot a 40% shot, as opposed to maybe miscommunicating on defense, miscommunicating on a switch, and him getting to the rim where he's 91% whenever his hand's around the rim, or maybe 59% when he's on what Bart Torvik would consider a close to. We're playing the percentage games. If you want to keep Dalton Connect from being an ESPN highlight, make him have to beat you in a game of horse over at the mid-range area, and I think you have a shot. SEC women basketball, we've talked about the tournament a little bit in depth today. I've been on and off shows today talking about this tournament, sponsored by Cool Care Heating, Air, and Plumbing and Refrigeration. And we will be all weekend long as well. We'll have some shows from Greenville on the weekend with Tyler Head and myself. But I did have a question come up in my mind on the way to Greenville this morning when thinking about the Gamecocks and the SEC tournament. When thinking about teams that are undefeated in the regular season and that enter the NCAA tournament undefeated, is it beneficial for them to get a loss before the NCAA tournament to quell the pressures of an undefeated team? I'll answer that question as the postgame show continues. Does South Carolina's women's basketball team, who's currently riding a 29-game win streak and a perfect undefeated season going into the SEC tournament, need to take a loss in order to make people feel better about their chances of winning the national championship? I'm Elijah Campbell here on the Postgame Show, taking you up until 6 o'clock, and that's a question that I posed to myself driving to Greenville earlier today, because I was thinking about historically teams that ride into the NCAA tournament on mammoth win streaks. And does that make your run to the championship game harder? I've talked to some people who are South Carolina fans or even neutral observers, be like, maybe it wouldn't be a terrible thing for at some point during the year, South Carolina takes a loss to be able to reflect that you're not invincible, to be able to hone in on what your flaws are, because there are some, while there are not a lot of deficiencies on this team, there are certainly some flaws that can lead you to believe that those can bite you in the rear when it comes national championship time. Last year's fatal flaw ultimately did. You went undefeated into the NCAA tournament, and you run into an Iowa team that has one player who can just spray it anywhere on the floor, and ultimately she ended up passing Pete Maravich in terms of all-time college basketball scoring. That's how good she is from just shooting from anywhere. That forced you to have to play the same game. They played a zone defense that was so compact in the paint that it forced you to have to beat them from the outside, and that one fatal flaw of outside shooting kept you from going to the national championship game, where you could have played an LSU team that you absolutely took behind the woodshed previously that February. Would they have benefited from a loss that year? I don't know. I don't think so. There are plenty of teams that go in, especially in women's basketball, that go into these tournaments and end up winning the whole thing, riding incredible win streaks. You go back to 2020, 2021, Stanford won the NCAA title on a 20-game win streak, not necessarily the win streak that, South Carolina's on right now. That was they ended the season on a 20-game win streak, meaning they went to the NCAA tournament on a 14. That's relatively big. That's solid. But you go back to 2018, 2019, Kim Mulkey's Baylor team, her last national championship with Baylor, they rode into that bad boy on a 23-game winning streak and ultimately turned 23 to 29 after they won the title. And then if you think about it, no team has gone undefeated and won a national championship since UConn in 2015, 2016. Again, that was only, that NCAA tournament was only 8 years ago. And Connecticut used to make this a habit. They did this a lot. They were no stranger of going to Final Fours and winning national championships with 0 losses. That happened pretty frequently. And they are the crown jewel of the sport. They're one of the greatest dynasties in the history of college sports, or any sport for that matter. They've done it many times. They went back-to-back undefeated seasons. From 2008, 2009 season, 2009, 2010, their winning streaks didn't bother them there. When they went 2 out of 3 years of winning national championships with undefeated records in 2013-14 and then 15-16, that didn't bother them too much, going 40-0 and 38-0. That's 4 seasons in their history, or 5 seasons in their history, where they went undefeated and won national championships. It's really hard, and you got to have a really good team to do it. You got to have a team with almost 0 flaws, because your margin for error is quite literally 0. I don't know if it's going to be better or worse for them if they go to Greenville here this week, run all the way to the championship game of the SEC, play LSU again, and maybe lose a close one. I don't know if it's going to make that much more of a difference in terms of feeling pressure, because would you rather at the end of the year lose in the Final Four and not have an SEC championship game, or lose in the SEC championship game, still end up losing in the Final Four, and then not really have anything other than a regular season title to hang your hat on? Maybe I'm different. I still value the SEC tournament. I still value conference tournaments. I know a lot of people don't, but this is the crown jewel event of your sport in your conference every year. The regular season title, I believe, is harder to win, but the SEC tournament championship, or conference tournament championship, is always more celebrated because it's right before the brackets are unveiled. It is a championship-type game that you win, and I find value in winning championship-type games. That's why I love early season tournaments in college basketball, because it gives you a small simulated experience of a championship type game if you are to make it there. That's why I still find value in teams that win, like the Maui Invitational or the preseason NIT, because you have experience in a championship type setting. Yes, the stakes aren't the same, but it is a championship type setting where you're playing for some hardware. I think that maybe if you play LSU in the SEC title game, or say Ole Miss upsets LSU and you play Ole Miss in the SEC title game, whoever it is, the atmosphere is still going to be electric because it is a SEC title game, and you are still going to gain title game experience. So while I get what people are saying, I understand the value of learning from a loss. And trust me, no one understands the value of learning from a loss in someone like Nick Saban, who I guarantee you, if you ask him right now, the best thing that happened to his football team this year was getting beat at home to Texas, because they got G-checked in that game. They got beat by multiple scores at home in a non-conference game for the first time since Nick Saban's first season in Tuscaloosa against Louisiana Monroe. That's a reality check. And then they go on the road to Tampa and barely beat a South Florida team that was horrific the year before. End up being a bowl team that won a bowl game, but that's beside the point. They had a loss and a close loss to set them back to reality. That had a lot of value. But I don't know if that type of loss in an SEC title game is going to make the difference between winning a national championship for the South Carolina team and losing a national championship for this South Carolina team. If anything, if I'm a fan, I always cheer for my teams to win. You always would. But I think there's just as much value in winning an SEC tournament championship by gaining that title game experience than maybe learning from a loss. Hour number 2 coming up here on the postgame show. Madison Harisic going to join me at 4:30 to break down tonight's big game. Hour number 2 of the postgame show starts now, getting you set for tonight's big game over at CLA between Tennessee and South Carolina. Madison Horisic from the state, she covers the Gamecocks for them. She'll be joining me at 5:30, give her thoughts on the matchup and what South Carolina is going to have to do to be able to pull off the upset again and control their own destiny in the SEC regular season championship race. And that's one thing I want to take it to right now, just how rare of an opportunity this is. I mentioned in the first hour that there's only a handful of opportunities that this town's been able to experience a men's basketball team be in contention for the NCAA tournament. There's only been a handful of instances since the turn of the century, since CLA has been built, that they have been in legitimate contention for an SEC regular season title in men's basketball. And tonight you have a chance to take control and control your destiny with one game left to play, granted on the road in a really tough environment in Starkville, but you still have a chance to make yourself get a share of an SEC regular season title, and it starts tonight with a home game against Tennessee. Lamont Paris was asked about it last night in terms of being able to control their own destiny and looking back on the season from the start when they were picked to finish 14th on SEC Media Days, what this means to be able to be in this position now to where you can win a share of an SEC title by performing your best in these next 2 games.
Yeah, we played well since then. It's been a pretty consistent season for our guys. Honestly, if you think back, and we've only lost 2 games in a row one time, and with only 5 total losses, it's been just very, very consistent performance on our guys' behalf. But it's fun to be here. It's fun to have so much going on. It's fun to be in a position where, and who knows how it shakes out in these last 2 games. Again, it's amazing how much movement can happen in just a matter of 2 games in terms of finishes and seeding. But we're one of the only a couple teams that control their own destiny. You know, if we play really well and win both games, no one has any say on whether or not we get a share of the title. No one, other than, you could potentially win it outright if you win both games too. And so all these scenarios, we try not to get caught up into that. We just want to acknowledge what we've done. Again, there's so much more to still be playing for, but it is nice to have, as I'm reluctant to say this out loud still, as it appears that our chances of playing in the NCAA tournament are pretty good at this point. It's a lot that goes off the table for some of these guys in terms of their mind, and now you can just go and play with a little less internalization of what needs to happen in order to make it to that real goal. Like you said, 2017, and then before that was 2004. Yeah. So, they're hard to get to, and they've been particularly hard here to be represented in that field.
While winning the SEC regular season, or at least even getting a share of the SEC regular season title, would mean a ton, Lamont alluded to something that I find really important here in the perspective that we have of this team, and that's that at the beginning of the year, their biggest goal was to make the NCAA tournament. They wanted to get into the big dance here in March. And Lamont, I can't remember which press conference it was this season, but somebody asked him a program-based question, right? A question about what he wanted to see this program become when he took this job not too long ago. And he said, I would like to get South Carolina, I'm paraphrasing here, I'd like to get South Carolina into the discussion of being in the NCAA tournament every year. He mentioned the last 2 times they've been. It's been 2017 and 2004. Granted, that 2017 year when you went to the NCAA tournament, I think you made the most of it by getting to a Final Four. But before that, you haven't been since 2004. And you had teams that were good enough to be able to make it. Got snubbed the year before, I get it. The losses to Georgia in the year prior to 2017, that will ultimately be the stain that kept them out of the big dance. And that one stung. But 2004 to 2017 was a long time. And 2017 to now, while not as long, still feels too damn long to be out of the NCAA tournament for a school that, even though that history's been a while, has had some solid men's basketball history. It's got solid It's got solid facilities. You're in the SEC. So the scheduling every year is always going to be good enough to where if you just win enough of those games, you can be in the SEC tournament every year. It's not like you're, Gonzaga and the WCC, where if you don't absolutely run through that conference every year, you're not getting into the tournament because you don't have enough quad one opportunities. Those quad one opportunities and all the opportunities to be able to make a resume good enough to get in are abundant. You got to be able to take advantage of those. And this year, to Lamont and his team's credit, they've done a fantastic job of taking care of those opportunities to the point where now they are in the land of the locks, roaming freely, frolicking with joy that they are at the land of the locks because they can lose these next 2 games and they could even lose in the first round of the SEC tournament. And this is doomsday scenario, or worst case scenario, not even doomsday, worst case scenario, poor phrasing. But worst case scenario for this team is to lose these next 2, lose the first round of the SEC tournament, and guess what? You're still in because you still have plenty of quad one wins. You still have a win against Tennessee on the road on your resume. Yes, you don't want to go into the NCAA tournament on a 3-game skid, but I think you've gotten to the point now where the resume is that good that we are going to expect this team to be in the NCAA tournament, barring anything just absolutely egregious. So even that, getting that off their shoulders is a huge relief for this team. I talked about in the last segment with the women's team about the pressure they'd be facing if they went into the NCAA tournament undefeated or not, and how much of a difference that's going to make. This team is experiencing a lack of pressure because they've already achieved a very, very large goal. That's not to say you to be complacent, but it's just a fact of you've already achieved a very large goal. Everything else is gravy. You didn't go into this year expecting this team to win a share of the SEC regular season title. If we were able to get all the people listening to this show right now, put them in a room, and I'd tell you to raise your hand if you expected this season to play out the way it did. You expected a legitimate shot at an SEC regular season title. I'll tell you to raise your hand if you did. There'd be no raised hands if we were all being honest with ourselves. So everything else is gravy. Obviously, you still want to win tonight because how damn cool would it be to be able to celebrate a share of an SEC regular season title? Because at the end of the day, it is still an SEC title. Been a long time since you've gotten to do that. You got a share of an SEC East title, which is like a third of a title because LSU won the West that year, and you shared that SEC title with that SEC East title with Tennessee, despite both of you being 10-6 in league play back in like 2009, 2010. That's part of an SEC title. I don't even know if they have that as a banner up at CLA. I need to go look for sure, but I don't even know if they have that as a banner up there because it was a third of a title. 33.3 repeating % of a title is barely a title. You can at least get a 50%, and that is a hell of a lot better than 33. But the fact that you would get that despite what the circumstances were at the beginning of the year, you'll take it. You'll take it. And one player that can help you get to that you've been without for the last couple games, is 3-point marksman Miles Stute, your Vanderbilt transfer. He's come in this season and made a really good impact. His defense has improved from his time at Vanderbilt to being here and being coached by Lamont Paris. He didn't get a lot of playing time towards the end of his tenure at Vanderbilt, and a lot of that was believed to have been of maybe some injuries, some defensive prowess, not being where Jerry Stackhouse wanted to be, but he's a solid defender, and he's an even better three-point shooter. You've been without him the last couple of games, and for those that remember, he had one of the best moments of the year by telling the Tennessee crowd to shush before smoothly icing the game with 2 free throws late. There's a chance that he'd be able to come back for this game, coming off of a sprained knee. And Lamont was asked about Miles Stute's update last night on Carolina Calls. Here was his response.
You know, I think he's, in talking with the trainers and him after practice, he feels pretty good about where he is physically and wants to try to give it a go. So I think some of it we'll see how the game's going, and but don't be surprised if we see him out there, and then how he responds to. It's one thing to do it at practice, and then you get in the game and it's live, and so we'll see what that looks like. But luckily for him, he's made really good progress with it. It hasn't been as severe as what it could have been, and so his teammates and his coaches and myself, we're all looking forward to getting him back in the fold. But tomorrow, don't be be shocked if he gets out there some tomorrow just to see what it looks like, in a real life scenario.
That would be a big shot in the arm for this Gamecock team who, if Tennessee ends up hitting a couple of tough three-pointers, if, Zakai Ziegler gets hot and a couple of the other role players for the Vols get hot from three and have to make tough contested shots, you'll need somebody to be able to knock down some threes with them. And that's not saying the lineup you'd have there, studioless, doesn't have that, because Michi's finally finding his own. His game against Florida's got to give you the utmost confidence that his confidence in his three-point shot is back and that three-point paralysis that he had in November and December can come back here in a crucial stretch of the season. Talon Cooper is essentially automatic when the ball is swung around one or two times and we're less than 7 seconds on a shot clock. You're almost surprised if his three-point catch and shoots miss in that scenario. But would it be good to have somebody who has shot like Miles Studi has his entire career to be able to get him back for this game tonight, especially considering how big he was and the role he played in beating Tennessee on January 30th. Would be a massive shot in the arm for this team. And Miles Studi, of course, is one of many one-year transfers on this team. B.J. Mack, a one-year transfer on this team. He's a guy who played a lot at Wofford. Talon Cooper, one-year transfer on this team. He's had some valuable basketball experience, whether it was those few years at Morehead State where he actually went and played in an NCAA tournament, to his 1 year at Minnesota last year where he was one of the best point guards in the Big Ten in terms of distributing and getting assists. And even Stephen Clark, who we've seen his role get diminished as the year has gone on, but played a lot of college basketball over at the Citadel. These guys are seen as rentals. They're very important players, and tonight they're going to be playing their last game at CLA. And this brings up an interesting case study, an interesting discussion piece in today's college basketball, where you can completely overturn a roster from 1 year to the next. While there were a lot of similar pieces on this year's Gamecock team, like Michi Johnson and Josh Gray and Benjamin Bosmans-Verdonk and Jacoby Wright and Zachary Davis, you did have an influx of one-year rental transfers who brought in a ton of experience, unique skill sets, and it's ultimately combined with that and the buy-in of the coaching and getting a superstar freshman in Colin Murray Boyles to come in and be able to help you almost right away the minute he stepped on the floor, made you better, has made this team 24-5 and in striking distance of an SEC championship game. What do these one-year seniors mean to this team? What do the senior group mean to this team? And what can this say about the rest of college basketball? Because I think it definitely says something, and Lamont had thoughts on maximizing these one-year transfers last night on Carolina Calls. We'll get into that as the postgame show continues. Hey, who likes winning money? I know I do. I'm not eligible for this, but I do like to win money, and I like to have the chance of winning money. And if you go to 1075thegame.com and register for the Palmetto Citizens FCU Grand Slam giveaway, you can possibly win you some money if the Gamecocks hit a home run with the bases loaded. We call that in baseball a grand slam. But they get a grand slam. You have a chance to win money if you enter this contest. Every game, $25 is added to the pot, and if a Gamecocks hitter rips a grand salami, you can win cash from Palmetto Citizens FCU. And as of now, the pot is currently at $275. As of right now, we'll give you a nice little score update. This game is airing live on WISW. That's why you're not hearing it on here right now. But South Carolina on the diamond playing against Davidson. They're up 4-1 in the top of the fifth. And I need to double check here, make sure there was not a grand slam home run, because then we would have to give away that money, and then the pot goes back to 0. And I don't think that that is the case. A run got walked in. A Kennedy Jones walk scored Dylan Brewer. A Kazi ground out to first base scored LeCroy. LeCroy singled through the left side, and that scored Ellis. All right, so no grand slam. 4 runs for South Carolina, but none by way of grand slam, so the deal still stands. Speaking of the deal, here's the deal for tonight. It is senior night at Colonial Life Arena. A lot of the seniors getting recognized tonight are transfer players, what I would call rentals, but they're rentals that have single-handedly changed this Gamecock program's trajectory from a team that was in the dumps last year to a team that is competing for an SEC regular season title. And those guys that I'm alluding to, B.J. Mack from Wofford, Miles Studi from Vanderbilt, Talon Cooper from Morehead State in Minnesota, Stephen Clark, you even started a few of the games this year before Colin Murray Boyles was healthy, from the Citadel. A lot of these guys are going to get the recognition they deserve, and Lamont Paris has done a fantastic job of utilizing to the best of their abilities the one-year rental transfer. And he was asked about that last night, about how do you as a coach get to maximize the 1 year that you have with these guys in such a small window to be able to make the change in a program that they've been able to this year.
I think there are a couple of things that are imperative for this thing to work out the way that it has worked out for us, and we've done it, for years now with some transfers. But I think the first thing that has to happen is the role that they're looking for and the role that you envision them playing have to be one and the same. I think if they're way off, it's not going to work out. Right. These guys just don't have time to spend a couple years developing or waiting. I think you kind of sort of have to have the role that they're expecting, and you have to have those conversations early, even though that might mean you may not get a kid if you say, hey, here's what I see for you here for us. I think that's a huge part of it, and I think you also have to have guys that are at the heart of it all for them is winning. I think if you look at professional sports, you'll get guys that are later in their careers, even if you, maybe not later in the career, but he's played for so long. Even like a guy like LeBron James tried to do it in Cleveland as long as he possibly could. It couldn't be done for him in Cleveland. So at some point he left only to win a championship, right? Mm-hmm. I think you get professional athletes ultimately that will do that later on in their careers, and I think that mentality is important in terms of finding the right guys that fit into these one-year situations. Is that at the end of the day, now you look at a guy like Talon Cooper is a perfect example, right? He had won at Morehead State. They played in the NCAA tournament. Played a smaller role there than here, but then he goes to Minnesota, and it was not a lot of winning that was going on. So there were a lot of reasons why he came here. First and foremost, he wanted to prove that winning was important, that he could win, he could be a big part of winning at this level. And I think all the guys that we brought in, at the heart of it, that was really what they were thinking. And if you get those two things right, and in general, the general basketball character of the person is high, then it just comes down to your evaluation. If you thought they were good and they're good, right? And you have to stand by your instincts in that. But those are probably the biggest factors in having success with guys that are not only transfers, but one-year guys.
It's mutually beneficial. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. Lamont needed roster spots. He needed veteran leadership at a position as important as the point guard position, especially when it comes to running his style of offense, which isn't predicated on getting in the fast break and running and running and running. It's more of that slow, tempoed basketball, playing in the half court, having the maturity to be able to handle the ball and dictate the pace whenever the game needs you to do it. And Talon Cooper was that guy. But also for Talon Cooper, he wasn't in the best of positions at Minnesota. He did make the upgrade from Morehead State, from the OVC, to Minnesota in the Big Ten. He's automatically in the Power Five. But an opportunity presented itself for Talon to be able to not only play on a team that he thought would be an improvement over Minnesota, and ultimately it was, because barring any miracle run in the Big Ten tournament, the Gophers won't be going dancing this year either. But going from Minnesota to South Carolina was an upgrade for him, and it gave him a chance to play in another NCAA tournament because he bought in. He bought into what was being sold to him, comes here, and then gets to come back home. He's from Dorman, played at Dorman High School. We did a lot of winning in that program, so he gets to come back to his home state. It was mutually beneficial for someone like Stephen Clark, who spent his entire career at the Citadel. The development isn't necessarily a priority because he kind of is what he is. He played 4 years of college basketball there. For someone like BJ Mack, maybe development into improving his college career isn't as a priority because he's almost a finished product when it comes to what he can be at the college game right now, and that is a low-post, crafty scorer who can maybe stretch the defense out a little bit on the perimeter. Lamont knew exactly what he was when he scouted him at Wofford. He got to see him at plenty at Wofford when he was the coach at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. But he was able to bring him in terms of maximizing this 1 year here. He knows these guys because he's either gotten to scout them well, play against them, or coach against them, like in the case of Clark and Mack. But he's able to know exactly why they want to come here and what's good for their careers as well. He knows this is a mutually beneficial process and that when these guys come here, their goal is also to win. It's not just maybe getting better and developing as a player, but it's contributing and doing whatever they can to be part of a winning team. I like the point he made last night during Carolina Calls that, even though Stephen Clark's minutes aren't what they were at the beginning of the year, even though he's not starting games anymore. But if you told him that he would have gotten to play key minutes in a game against number 6 Kentucky on a nationally televised game in which they beat number 6 Kentucky by 17 points, and he got to contribute to that win, I'm sure he would have jumped, would have leapt out of a chair or whatever he was at for the opportunity to get to contribute to even for a moment like that. It was a big moment for him, big moment for the program. It was an awesome moment for somebody who got to play, with no disrespect to the SoCon, that's one of my favorite conferences in college basketball, but who's been playing at the lower end of the SoCon for most of his career. Who wouldn't leap at that opportunity? Madison Horisic from the state. She covers the Gamecocks basketball team for them. She's going to join me here in the next segment. We're going to break down this big matchup, what the Gamecocks need to do to go back-to-back against the Tennessee Volunteers. Madison Horisic joins me coming up here on the Postgame Show. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to report to you that might be causing some delays on the roadways this Wednesday afternoon. We're going to start here in Richland County. An accident has the left lane completely blocked on I-20 westbound over at Wilson Boulevard near exit 71. Again, an accident has blocked the left lane completely on I-20 westbound over at Wilson Boulevard near exit 71. Also in Richland County, an accident's been reported at Claudia Drive, at Hearn Drive, and another one on Congress Road at Toms Creek Road. Going into Lexington County, an accident's been reported on Harbison Boulevard over at I-26. We also have one in Lexington County on Highway 1 near Augusta Road near I-26, and one more in Richland County on Syrup Mill Road near Woodlander Drive. In just 2.5 hours, a smidge under 2.5 hours, the South Carolina Gamecocks and Tennessee Volunteers will tip off with the driver's seat in the SEC regular season title race on the line. And if Tennessee wins, they get a share of it automatically. And if South Carolina wins, they continue to control their own destiny. Elijah Campbell here on the Postgame Show, joined now by Madison Horisic from the state. She has been covering the Gamecocks all year long, this men's basketball team, and their ascension into SEC contention. Madison, appreciate you joining me and really looking forward to this game tonight.
Well, first off, thank you so much, Elijah, for having me on. I am a little nervous. As I said to you earlier before we hopped on, I am a little nervous, and I think a lot of it is just, at the end of the day, I'm a sports fan, so these types of games get your adrenaline going well beforehand, but I am very much excited to see what's going to happen tonight. This is going to be such a big game in the grand scheme of both Tennessee and South Carolina's stories this year, and it is so cool to be able to say that you and I are going to be a part of that tonight.
Oh, absolutely. We were talking about it before, coming on air. Like, I live for games like this where there's a lot on the line, where there's going to be a packed house. I know you tweeted that it's sold out, that we're going to have a loud crowd, a very invested crowd. CLA's been rocking all season long, and to their credit, they have really helped bring a lot of juice into this program along with what the team is doing on the floor. But they're playing a pretty good opponent tonight. Tennessee is absolutely on fire and coming off one of their best wins of the year at Alabama. Not many teams have gone into Coleman Coliseum this year and held the Tide to 74 points. We talk a lot about what this Tennessee team does offensively, but I think sometimes it gets buried about how good of a defensive team they are, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest elements of tonight's game. Absolutely.
Tennessee's defense is one of the best in the SEC, and for some reason it has been extremely underrated and has flown under the radar for a lot of different people. And, I mean, when you look at how many points they allow per game, they were sitting at the top of the conference for almost the entire year. And you very much can see it when you're watching it and you're reviewing the tape and you're breaking down film and everything. And now what's interesting is that South Carolina also is really good at minimizing scoring opportunities. And so this is very much going to be a battle of, at least in my opinion, who can capitalize on forcing turnovers and who can limit turnovers themselves. Taking care of the ball is going to be so key this evening, in just kind of maintaining momentum as that game kind of develops this evening.
Absolutely. And South Carolina's defense, did an incredible job of limiting Tennessee to 59 points. I bragged about Tennessee's defense holding Alabama to 74 in their home gym. Not anybody can just say that you walked into Thompson-Boling at any point and held Tennessee to 59 points. And granted, Dalton Connect had 31 of those, but at the end of the day, the team had 59. What do you think South Carolina did very well in that game in terms of shutting down the rest of the team that could be replicable tonight?
I think the biggest thing is that they're so good at making you move the ball around a lot more and making shot selection so difficult. And we saw it a little bit on Saturday against Florida when Paris kind of switched to that 1-3-1 zone defense, which, I kind of laugh about a little bit because that is a very, for lack of a better word, high school tactic. You see a lot of high school varsity teams go for that style of defense, but it was so effective because it's something that you can kind of pull out of the hat, and pretty much everybody will know how to run that scheme very well. But, forcing Tennessee to move the ball a lot more than making them force an awkward shot is going to be so big. If they can wind that shot clock down against the Vols, South Carolina is going to put themselves in a really good position because they're forcing a high-scoring offense to slow down. And that's what they did against Kentucky, and it was successful then, and it could be successful again tonight.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that 1-3-1-2 and how it definitely makes you have to maybe throw different types of passes than you would a regular 2-3 or man. And I played a clip earlier that, Lamont talking last night on Carolina Calls about maybe the differences between a 1-3-1 and a 2-3. And, he says a lot of people have seen 2-3 zones, and not a lot of people have been able to play against a 1-3-1, and how this rendition of it is a lot more different than a lot of zones a lot of teams have played. But he said now on the reverse side, teams have time to prepare for it. I think this will help South Carolina in a tournament setting when there's not, a lot of time in between games to fully scout in a practice situation that 1-3-1 zone. But Tennessee's had a few days to prepare for it. Do you think we see this tonight at any point?
I think it's possible. I think a lot of it depends on what the Vols kind of show right out of the gate. And it also depends on how well the rest of Tennessee's roster is scoring. If they have an off shooting night, for the exception of Neck, you're looking at a fairly similar game where, we didn't really see a lot of that 1-3-1 in Knoxville when they played earlier this year. Now, if they kind of play a little bit more of a game like Florida, where Florida goes on those big 10-0 runs throughout the course of the game, and you have to kind of whittle that down and come back, there's a potential that we'll see that 1-3-1 kind of reappear. But it really does come down to who on Tennessee is hot and how many of those Bull players are having a good game. So, the fact that Tennessee didn't have a ton of high-scoring players in Knoxville was a huge, huge part of South Carolina's ability to upset that team. And if they can continue doing that, that's going to really set them up nicely.
And then talking about a couple of the players on this South Carolina team right now, Meechie Johnson's had one of the more fascinating seasons of really anybody in college basketball, from shooting the lights out in the months of November and December to maybe hitting a little bit of a shooting slump in SEC play, and then going on an absolute heater here in these last few games, scoring 25 points against Florida, 22 against Texas A&M, along with getting the game-winning assist. What progression have you seen from Meechie here in just these last two games that's been able to allow him to maybe channel his November and December Meechie that was able to put up a lot of scoring numbers?
I think with Meechie's ability to score and be able to just be effective. He's effective on the court, whether he's scoring 20-some-odd points or if he's got 6 assists up there with Talon Cooper. I think the biggest thing is that he is just so adaptable and so coachable, and that he's very much not having to have the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he's playing like it. He's very much played like that throughout, I guess you could call those shooting slumps. Personally, I never thought that Meechie was playing bad or wasn't playing well throughout the regular season when his numbers on offense weren't that good, just because I was noticing the amount of times that he was getting all of these beautiful assists. Sometimes they were some of the best passes the entire game. And it was boosting players like Colin Murray-Boyles to drop 30 against Vanderbilt, or it was Josh Gray getting 15 against Georgia, or whomever it may be, Miles Studi getting 13 against Tennessee in January. Like, he was able to be so efficient elsewhere. And in turn, all he needed was just one game where he could walk out and just sink those first couple shots. And for him to have the confidence and the backing of the rest of the team, be like, yeah, do whatever you got to do at this point. And I think that's kind of where we see the development. It's not necessarily he maybe tweaked something, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Madison Horisic from the State joins me right now to talk about tonight's big game. Lamont said last night on Carolina Calls that he might expect Miles Studi to be ready to play for tonight, that you might see him in action to just see what it looks like. What are you expecting in terms of minutes from Miles Studi tonight, and what do you think he could be in terms of effectiveness? Because a sprained knee can be a tough thing to come back from. There's never really a set timeline for some of those injuries.
Yeah, sprained knee is not a fun injury to deal with, especially when you are playing a sport that requires you to have such fast starts and stops, like on a basketball court, especially with that slick surface, too. I wouldn't be shocked if we see him have some limited minutes, maybe not anything more than, I would say at the very, very most, you're probably not looking more than 15. I also would not be shocked if he plays 2 or 3. And I think the counteract here is that, yes, Miles Studi has been theoretically given the green light to play tonight. South Carolina also still isn't down any players than the last time they faced Tennessee. They're actually up one because Ibrahima Diba is back. And while he is also facing some limited minutes, that is another player that can come in and kind of fill in some roles as needed. And that also might benefit South Carolina, too. I was thinking about that earlier today and kind of made that connection. There's just another available player on the bench that wasn't before. And so I would be interested to see how many minutes Miles gets. I think with the physicality that's going to be needed on both sides of the ball for South Carolina, I wouldn't be shocked if he's somewhere floating around that 10-minute mark. But I'm also not an athletic trainer. I've never claimed to be one.
It's
so
above
for
our pay
all I
grade.
know, exactly. And for all we know, he could play upwards of 20, or he could play as low as 5. Who knows?
And lastly, about a minute here for you, Madison. South Carolina needs to do what tonight to ensure that they pull off the back-to-back upsets against Tennessee?
That's a hard one because I feel like there's so many ways you could answer this, Elijah. If I had to pick one thing, or the first thing that comes to my mind, they need to take care of the basketball first and foremost. They need to limit turnovers from offense to defense, and they need to force turnovers from defense to offense. If they can get a couple fast break points, if they can get the bench points up to 13, 15, where it's been these last couple games, that's going to be big for this team if they're going to make sure they can get everybody involved in some capacity. And I truly believe it's going to be a battle of taking care of the basketball at the end of the day.
I could absolutely see that happening, and if South Carolina is able to do that and limit those possessions, I think we're in for a fun basketball game tonight. Madison Horisic from the State has been my guest this segment. Madison, appreciate you joining me today, and looking forward to sitting next to you all tonight at the game and seeing how this bad boy folds out.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a great time, and I will see you this evening, Elijah.
That sounds like a plan. Madison Horisic from the State. She's been covering the Gamecocks men's basketball team all season long. Some good stuff there getting into tonight's mega matchup. And it's March. There's a lot of good regular season basketball on right now, but there's some good conference tournament games being played here in the last 24 hours. And because of a stupid NCAA rule, it makes a certain accomplishment for some teams completely diminished. I'll vent and tell you what that is as the postgame show wraps up hour number 2. As always, you can watch our shows here on the Game TV on our YouTube page. Just go to the Game TV. Our Game TV YouTube page. The Game TV is brought to you by Shepherd's Glass. Shout out to them for being able to sponsor these video streams. That way you can watch me run in here after driving with totally legal speeds from Greenville to Columbia to get here in time to host this show, and get down here and not have time to take off my SEC women's tournament credential, because I have this credential because I will be in Greenville all week providing updates from the SEC women's basketball tournament. To go ahead and get you started with some updates from earlier today, Florida just took down Missouri in a close 66-60 game. They will be playing Vanderbilt tomorrow afternoon. Kentucky took down Georgia in the opener. The game I got to report from today, that was a 64-50 game in which, well, the exception of a 10-4 run from Georgia earlier today, Kentucky took a 17-4 run to the second quarter and never looked back, despite Javon Nicholson's 23 points. But Kentucky wins. They're going to take on the Tennessee Lady Vols tomorrow afternoon, about 25 minutes after the conclusion of 8-seed Mississippi State and 9-seed Texas A&M. And, of course, that A&M and State winner will take on the undefeated South Carolina Gamecocks. And, of course, our sponsor, all of our SEC women's tournament coverage is brought to you by Cool Care Heating and Air, Plumbing, Refrigeration. They are been a huge help in sponsoring this. And, of course, you can always go to coolcarehvac.com to check them out if you need help with your HVAC or plumbing. A lot of conference tournaments going on. You just mentioned the women's SEC tournament. And then on the men's side, the Atlantic Sun tournament has been absolutely electric. I think last night was a good display while everybody was watching Florida and Alabama, and rightfully so. I was watching a ton of Florida and Alabama before I saw what these games were going to. I flipped over to watch 10-seeded Jacksonville pull off a stunning upset at 1-seeded Eastern Kentucky. Not many times you see a 10-seed beat the 1-seed. And then I saw Northern Alabama beat Lipscomb at the buzzer. Lipscomb hit a 3 with 4 seconds left to tie it. KJ Johnson, North Alabama point guard, who was a former Lipscomb point guard, facing his old team at his old arena, hits a floater from about 3-point range, top of the key as time expired to pull off the upset there. And then Austin Peay, the 4-seed, went to overtime with 5-seed North Florida in what was a back-and-forth game which both teams scored over 100. It was a whole lot of fun. And usually if you're a 1-seed like Eastern Kentucky, a night like last night sucks. You're the 1-seed, you did one of the hardest things in your sport, and that's win your conference regular season. Nobody knows you like your conference opponents know you. And for you to go through the regular season gauntlet and win it, I don't care what league it is. I don't care if it's the Big East. I don't care if it's the SEC. I don't care if it's the Ohio Valley Conference or the Southland. Winning a conference regular season is hard, and it's harder to do that than to win your conference tournament. Yes, I understand why the conference tournament is the auto bid to get into the NCAA tournament, and that's what makes these made-for-television events so damn fun. It's so much fun to watch a team play for their lives every night in the month of March to try to get to this goal, try to achieve the ultimate dream of playing in the NCAA tournament. This stuff matters. And when a team loses in the conference championship game in their tournament and you see them breaking down in tears, it doesn't matter if they were a conference regular season title, because that doesn't get them the ultimate goal of getting to the NCAA tournament. But there used to be a good consolation prize to winning the harder award, because before this year, a team like Eastern Kentucky, who ran through the gauntlet of their regular season schedule, was able to win more conference games than anybody else in their league and rightfully earn a league title, would normally get an auto bid to the NIT if they don't win their conference tournament. I know the NIT doesn't mean anything for people here in South Carolina because you went back-to-back with Dave Odom, and it was cool after one, but when you win the other one, what exactly is that for your program? I'm sure Dave Odom doesn't go to bed every night thinking, man, I'm one of the greatest NIT coaches ever. I've won 3. It's cool to win something, but it meant you didn't make the NCAA tournament. It means you didn't achieve the goal you set out to achieve at the beginning of the season. But for schools like Eastern Kentucky, the NIT means something. especially when it meant the prize of the NIT, the Final Four of the NIT, was to play at Madison Square Garden. How many of those kids at Eastern Kentucky would dream to play at MSG? How many of it would it be the ultimate privilege of their basketball careers to be able to finish their season at Madison Square Garden? I covered a Lipscomb Bison's basketball team back when I was living in Nashville and working at the radio station there that went to the NIT because they won the Atlantic Sun regular season, which I will still argue is the harder regular title to win as opposed to a conference tournament. But they won the regular season title, lost in the conference championship game, but got to play in the NIT and made a run to the NIT Final Four where they got to go to the NIT championship game and lost to Texas. But they got to play at Madison Square Garden, which for many of those kids was an absolute privilege. But you don't get to do that anymore because the NCAA starting this year is not allowing the automatic bid for a regular season title regardless of the league you're in. Eastern Kentucky will be at the mercy of an NIT selection committee. Imagine how fun being on that committee is as opposed to the NCAA tournament committee. But because of chasing the dollars and being terrified that Fox Sports would create their own tournament with their own teams they're affiliated with, they took away something from some of these schools that means a lot to certain kids. Hour number 3 of the postgame show coming up next. From the WIS Traffic Center, I'm Elijah Campbell with a few accidents to report to you that might be causing some delays on the roadways here this Wednesday afternoon. An accident in Richland County at Claudia Drive at Hearn Drive is causing some traffic delay. Got another one reported here in Richland County. Clemson Road at Old Clemson Road, that one's recently been reported. Traffic's moving pretty slowly through that area. Keeping it in Richland County, an accident has also been reported on Faro Road at Highway 555 at Killian Road. We also have one in Lexington County at Highway 1 over at Augusta Road near I-26, and on Highway 302 at Highway 6 near South Lake Drive. That's right. You don't need a clock to tell you it's 5 o'clock because I'm about to give you the news like we do every day at 5 o'clock here on the Postgame Show. I'm Elijah Campbell here filling in for Jay Phillips. Not filling in. I'm on the show every day. I'm leading the show today because of Jay's absence. He'll be back tomorrow to react to the big game against Tennessee tonight and the upcoming SEC Women's Tournament. All the good stuff we got going on here in Columbia. Jay will come back tomorrow to break it all down, and I will be live from Greenville at the SEC Women's Tournament, and we'll be on air shortly after Mississippi State and Texas A&M. I'll be live in Greenville all week, doing daily reports for all the shows, being able to pop in from time to time to give some reports and updates. And our coverage, my coverage specifically, over in Greenville is sponsored by Cool Care Heating and Air, Plumbing and Refrigeration. Need help with your HVAC or plumbing? Contact the experts at Cool Care Heating and Air. Check them out at coolcarehvac.com. For more, they're sponsoring the women's basketball coverage here this week. For the news, sponsored by Integrated Media, as they do every day. They did a fantastic job hooking up all of our stuff here in the studio for the Game TV. If you like it how it's set up here, then they can do that at your home if you want to do something similar, or if you want to be able to set up TVs and a nice little viewing station for the big March Madness tournament coming up here in a few weeks. They can help you with that. Guaranteed. Some of the big headlines from around sports today: the Bills, the Buffalo Bills, have made some cuts. It's been franchise tag. It was franchise tag day yesterday, and it's time to make some cuts to save some money, and the Bills are doing so by releasing Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, and Mitch Morse. Now, Tre'Davious White and Jordan Poyer were two of the best players in that secondary. Now that Josh Allen's contract is taking a leap in terms of what the amount of space it's taking in the salary cap, I think it went from like 16% to almost 50% of their salary cap. I mean, it took a massive hit, maybe not 50. I think maybe almost $50 million a year. I think that's what it was. But it is taking up a large portion of the Buffalo Bills salary cap, and you're not going to not pay the quarterback, so you're going to have to make cuts elsewhere. And now that it's time to make those decisions, the defensive secondary is what is the, I guess, catching the strays of Josh Allen's contract and the restructuring of it. And no longer will Tre'Davious White or Jordan Poyer be a part of the Buffalo Bills. So that's going to be two free agents with relatively high price tags. They're going to be on the market for teams looking to boost their secondary. The Buffalo Bills are going to look a whole lot different next year. And I guess that's another thing that makes the loss to Kansas City in the divisional round of the playoffs here last year so much worse. Yeah, it sucks to lose at home in a playoff game, especially in that fashion when it was a back-and-forth game and you had every opportunity to take it over and win it in the end. You just didn't do it. And then to go on and see the guy that beat you go up and win another Super Bowl, his third, and you're always going to have the thought of it could have been me. Well, it's going to be worse now that the Chiefs did that, won a Super Bowl, won another AFC title, despite having to make similar type of cuts to their roster. It's one of the reasons why they couldn't pay Tyreek Hill and keep him around. One of the reasons why they traded Tyreek Hill to the Miami Dolphins. And guess what? It still didn't matter. But the Bills lost while still being in a fairly good salary cap position. Now they are in a little bit of cap trouble, and the casualties of that are cornerback Tre'Davious White and safety Jordan Poyer. A signing in the NFL. We're going to have a lot of NFL news today with the offseason getting into full effect with free agencies and releases happening. But tight end Zach Ertz is going to be back in the NFC East, but this time as a member of the Washington Commanders. According to John Keim, ESPN staff reporter, the Washington Commanders made their first key offseason signing and reunited offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury with one of his former players. The Commanders signed veteran tight end Zach Ertz to a one-year deal, a source confirmed to ESPN. Ertz will be entering year number 13, and this contract looks to be worth up to $5 million. So Ertz has played a long time in the NFL. What the value is for an aging tight end, about $5 million in a year sounds about right. What Zach Ertz has left in the tank, can't necessarily tell you. I don't know if he has much. I know he signed that contract to play for the Detroit Lions for the NFC Championship game and Super Bowl if they were to make it. So he was a Lion for like 5 days, but was basically in an absolute break in case of emergency role with Detroit. Never made it onto the field, or at least if he did, he snuck out there, and I didn't see him or hear his name called at any point in that game. Yes, in the NFC Championship against San Francisco. But Detroit Lion legend Zach Ertz is now a member of the Washington Commanders. Another news here today: Russell Wilson, obviously cut by the Broncos just a few days ago. That led off our 5 o'clock news segment then, but a source shares with ESPN, doesn't have the name of the writer on it, but a source did confirm to ESPN that Broncos okayed Russell Wilson to talk to teams before his release. So to maybe gauge, I guess, what a free agent market would be for Russell Wilson. The article reads, before free agency begins next week, the Broncos have given soon-to-be-released quarterback Russell Wilson permission to immediately begin speaking and meeting with other teams in their home cities. This is from an Adam Schefter report. The Broncos announced Monday that they informed Wilson that he would be released after the 2024 league year begins on March 13th, a move that will end his tumultuous 2-season run with the team. So we'll see where he goes. I can't be confident that after, an 11-19 record in Russell Wilson's starts as a Denver Bronco is going to get many teams amped to employ him, especially for a guy that commands so much attention, and not just on the field as the quarterback, but for those who don't remember, he did, make some demands when he got traded to Denver to have his own office inside the facility, something that no other quarterback in the NFL really has. He is a brand in his own, and I think that rubbed a lot of people in Denver the wrong way, and I guarantee you that rubbed Sean Payton the wrong way. And there were reports that said that rubbed Sean Payton the wrong way, and news coming out today that this move of releasing Russell Wilson was all but inevitable, and that is kind of what led to his release. So this was no surprise for Russell Wilson when the news was announced earlier this week. In some local news last night, South Carolina was back on the baseball diamond against another in-state foe. They're bouncing back from a pair of one-run losses to Clemson over the weekend. The Citadel came to town, and South Carolina took care of business in that one, winning 7-1 rather. In the game, Parker Marlatt got the win. He's 1-0 on the season. No home runs for South Carolina, but the biggest thing that they want to eliminate is runners left on base. Yes, they scored 7 runs, which is a plus, but they did leave 13 runners left on base. Dylan Brewer, the leadoff man, who has gone from 7-hole hitter to leadoff man, has played very well all season long, and up until yesterday had a batting average of over 500, was 0 for 4 yesterday, and left 6 runners on himself. Mark Kingston was asked after the game about the runners getting left on base, and here was Coach Kingston's response.
It's a work in progress for us. There's no question about that. We're not going to hide from it. But we had a big hitters meeting today with all the hitters, all the coaches, and we just talked about some things. And that's an area we know we need to improve on. And it's going to be a big part of what is our approach in all of our bats, not just in RBI at bats. And so I think it will carry over, but it's not going to happen overnight. We get on base a lot. Now we just need to make that next step and get over that hump of, okay, now we're getting those guys in pretty consistently.
They're going to have to get it fixed pretty quick, especially when SEC play rolls around. The pitching staff did obviously more than enough to keep them in the game and win it for them yesterday. As a whole, the pitching staff went full 9 innings, 13 strikeouts, no walks from Copper, Marlatt, McCreary, and Quinn, the 4 pitchers who showed up in yesterday's game against the Citadel. 13 strikeouts, no walks. Pretty good. 1 earned run given up. They're in action today. That game was on WISW. I know I said yesterday at the end of the show that you'd be able to hear this game today here on WNKT, but that is not the case. We call a little bit of an audible late last night, and that's why you're hearing my voice right now instead of the broadcast. But to give you an update from Founders Park right now, Ty Good is on the mound with the Gamecocks leading 4-1 against Davidson in the top of the 7th. We'll go ahead and look and see exactly what this lineup has done today, considering that we are on left on base watch. I feel like for every game until the situation gets rectified, we are going to be watching like a hawk the LOB number in the box score for every game from here on out. And today against Davidson, they have left 9 runners on base. Dylan Brewer's left 2 on today, and the guy with the award for the most runners left on today is Will Tippett. He's left 4 on so far. He is 1 for 3 in the game, but has left 4 runners on base. South Carolina, however, leads 4-1 in the top of the 7th. There are no outs. A 2-1 count with Ty Good on the mound. Becker got the start today. Got 1 inning in, struck out 2, but walked 3. Gave up a run. And then Pitzer came in 3 1/3 innings. He struck out 5, only walked 1, and Ty Good has been in for an inning and 2/3. And he has struck out 4, has not walked a batter yet. So South Carolina getting a little more walk happy on the mound in this game and leaving some runners on base, but it has not made that much of a difference as they still hold a 3-run lead in the 7th. Hope to see them hold on here in this game to be able to win and get on a 2-game winning streak after that tough series against Clemson. And then on Friday, 7 o'clock, first pitch, they will take on Longwood. So that'll be another non-conference matchup. The weekend matchup will be against the Lancers of Longwood. I bet if I made that a trivia question for tickets, not going to, too late now, but if I made that a trivia question, if you had to guess Longwood's nickname, I don't think anyone would be able to come up with Lancers without having to Google it first. I know I wouldn't. But Tuesday, March 12th, they will take on Georgia State, and that's going to be a quote-unquote neutral game over in North Augusta at SRP Park. And then after that, it is SEC baseball season, starting with their first series at Ole Miss on the road on March 15th. They'll get a little bit of a break when they play at USC Upstate on Tuesday, March 19th, and then the first home baseball series here at Founders Park is going to start Friday, March 22nd against Vanderbilt. So very few non-conference games remaining to be able to work out the whole leaving runners on base thing. We'll see if Coach Kingston and his crew can be able to do it before the start of conference play when the real gauntlet begins. That's been the 5 o'clock news segment brought to you by Integrated Media. Our friends over at Integrated Media, they've taken care of us here over at the game with our video streaming and have helped set up the Game TV that we can now enjoy on YouTube, on our YouTube page, the Game TV. And then if you need them to hook you up, set up a nice setup for the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I have been to Jay Phillips's house, breaking news, and I have seen the setup they did for him, and he has the ultimate viewing experience. They can help you with everything that you have in terms of media setups, and they do a pretty damn good job of it over at Integrated Media. A couple more segments to go here in the show leading up to Tennessee and South Carolina. Again, pregame coverage is going to start here at 6:30 on this station. Tip-off is going to be at 7. We continue the breakdown with more cuts from Lamont Paris, dive into his mind on what he's thinking about tonight's matchup, and see what Rick Barnes is thinking about. Obviously, this was one of the most defining losses that Tennessee had in their season. What are his thoughts about the Gamecocks coming into tonight's pivotal game? We'll dive into that as the postgame show continues. Yeah, no Jay Phillips today, but he'll be back tomorrow. Hope he enjoyed these few days off. Now we got to do a little bit of traveling, so we get to pick on him a little bit whenever he comes back. I will be on the show as well, but I will not be here in the studio, but I will be in Greenville for the SEC Women's Basketball Tournament. Be doing coverage there all day starting tomorrow at noon with Texas A&M and Mississippi State playing for the right to get to play the South Carolina Gamecocks, the undefeated South Carolina Gamecocks. And, of course, our coverage of this tournament brought to you by Cool Care Heating and Air, Plumbing and Refrigeration. Need help with your HVAC or plumbing? Contact the experts at Cool Care Heating and Air. Check them out at coolcarehvac.com. And tonight, before we can even get to tomorrow, I can think about tomorrow when tonight is such a big deal. Tennessee and South Carolina at 7 o'clock can be heard here on 107.5. Can also be heard on the app and also be seen on ESPN2. But this is a big game, obviously. I think we can hammer that home all day and it's still not maybe relay the importance of it. And not just for South Carolina. We discussed the historical significance of this game, of the only handful of times you've even been in SEC regular season contention in your program's history, or even just since the turn of the century. You've also have an opportunity to vastly improve your seed in the NCAA tournament, to maybe avoid the tricky 5-12 matchup that seems to trip up a lot of teams historically. But for Tennessee, this is a chance. A win tonight would clinch them a share of the SEC regular season title and also avenge a loss that's been a turning point for them this season. Ever since South Carolina beat the Vols 63-59 at Thompson Bowling Arena, they have been 8-1 with the only loss coming in a really weird game at Texas A&M, where A&M just bludgeoned them on the boards, and then Tennessee returned the favor just not long after that by beating them by 35 points. So they avenged that loss, but that's the only blemish since that game. Tennessee's been 8-1, and there's been a lot of changes. I think you can point to Zakai Ziegler, the 5'9" point guard from New York, being a little healthier. He tore his ACL in early March of last year, and for the first couple months of the season, it almost felt like it was rushed, that his return was a little bit hastened by the need to have a starting point guard this year, and he wasn't at 100%. And in the game against South Carolina, you could tell that Ziegler wasn't what he normally is, especially considering what he's done since then. Ziegler in that game, only 2 points. He was 0 of 2 from 2, 0 of 4 from 3, and was only 50% from the free throw line, made only 2 of his 4 free throw attempts. Tennessee as a team was 12 of 20 from the line in that game. He had 3 assists, but also had 2 turnovers. It was not a banner night for Mr. Ziegler. But Rick Barnes was asked exactly what other things have been different about this Tennessee team since that loss, and here was his response.
I don't know. We've been in a lot of hard-fought basketball games, and our league is, again, I know everyone talks about how good their leagues are, and it's true. I mean, conference play is tough in any league. I don't care what numbers and all this say. I mean, you go on the road or you play at home, and every league is tough and demanding. But our team is, I think we've tried to get better. As you guys have been with us from the beginning, we've talked about consistency, we've talked about rebounding, ball screen down, a lot of different things. And the key is that I think that we've still tried to improve as the season goes on. And I would tell you, we're going to court today with that in mind, knowing that we've got to be a mindset that we can really try to get our game plan in and know we're going to have to execute it, but also the things that we know we've got to get better with, we've got to try to get better. What are the
They're going to try to get better, and Zakai Ziegler certainly has. That's going to be the biggest thing for me to watch tonight, is exactly what difference it is from him in this game to the other. Obviously, Dalton Knecht had 30-plus points in the game at Tennessee, but it was not enough because the team only scored 59. But what does a 100% Ziegler look on the floor against this really good South Carolina defense that has made a lot of really good teams have to do a lot of things on offense that they don't normally do or don't want to do? We'll see exactly what changes it has in that part of the game, because Ziegler, since that game, is averaging 15 points a game and 7.7 assists and is making over 40% of his threes. So he's certainly improved a lot in that area. That's a matchup that I'm going to have my eye on pretty intensely tonight. Rick Barnes discusses also what he thinks his team needs to do a little bit differently now that the Vols have to travel to Columbia and play in front of this raucous CLA crowd.
Got to play better, obviously, in a lot of different areas, but their execution was good, and we've got to do a better job with everything we talk about every game, whether it's transition defense, executing our half-court defense, offensively, doing what we need to do there. You go back, I mean, it's another game. They're better than they were here. We're better than we were here, too, but it's going to be a great atmosphere, a great crowd, and it should be. They deserve it. They've earned it. But there's not one part of it. We're going to have to do everything. And, again, it's going to be another 40 minutes, and we're going to have to be better, obviously.
Right, darn right, Rick. They did deserve it. They have deserved to be able to have this moment and to be able to control their own destiny with how they've played this season. And he's right about the crowd. I'm excited to see that place rocking tonight. And it's going to be an electric atmosphere. And I have mentioned, what are the differences about Tennessee being 8-1 and having maybe some players be 100%, but South Carolina's different too. The Gamecocks are a little different now than they were then, and I think they've gotten better, especially here in these last few games on this 3-game winning streak, having to pull out 2 of those on the road and having to do them in different ways. So while the Vols have changed, the Gamecocks have as well, and here's what Rick Barnes has noticed with those changes with South Carolina from January 30th to now.
One, how well they're coached, a team that doesn't commit a lot of mistakes, a team that knows exactly what they're looking for, a team that can very quickly exploit the matchups that they want to get if you do a lot of switching, and they get you in a position where they can get the switch they want. They took great advantage of it here in a lot of different ways, but just extremely fundamental. Plays the pace that they want to play with, and Lamont has done just an incredible job, one of the great jobs, coaching jobs, not just this year, but as long as I've been in basketball, watching what he's done and the way he's turned it around and where they are today. But they're just, and they got good players. Don't make no bones about it. They've got good players. You wouldn't be able to be where they are today in this league because it's, again, we've talked about how competitive it is in this league, and maybe the most competitive ever. For them to be playing for a championship speaks volumes not only about the players but also the coaching staff.
Coach on.
So Rick Barnes, highly complimentary of the players on this roster. And I think in one player that comes to mind, too, that has really blossomed since that Tennessee win has been Colin Murray Boyles. And, he played a very big role in pulling off that upset by scoring. He only scored 4 points, but he had 3 assists, and didn't turn the ball over any. You talk about this being a veteran team that doesn't turn the ball over a lot. Colin Murray Boyles in that game did not turn the ball over any and almost had as many assists as he did points because he is such a good shot creator, even from the forward position. And since that game, you've seen a lot of his better games. Before that Tennessee game he had the career high 17 points against Florida A&M and the 10 against Elon and the 11 against Arkansas. But then you really saw him break out as a scorer after that. Since that Tennessee game, he scored 16 against Georgia, 16 against Ole Miss, the 31-point game against Vanderbilt that really got him on a lot of radars around the country. He had 19 in the loss against Auburn, 13 in the loss against LSU, but 12 against Ole Miss, then the 8 against A&M, in which he had foul trouble and only really got to play about 26 minutes and still was able to grab 12 rebounds in that game and get 3 assists, but then scored 15 points in the last game against Florida, including going 9 of 10 from the free throw line, which is a stark contrast to the 4 of 10 he win against Georgia when they lost that game at home. He has gotten a lot better, and while I think he was still a big part of the offense in that starting lineup when they played in Knoxville, he has become more a part of this Gamecock team and more vital to their success since January 30th. So the two players on both sides that are completely different players than they were when these teams first met, Zakai Ziegler and Colin Murray Boyles, are going to have a lot to say in determining the outcome of tonight's game. We'll go ahead and look at the rest of the games from the SEC tonight, take a look at the standings, and then take another look at the SEC women's basketball tournament with that tournament tipping off today in Greenville at Bon Secours Arena. We'll go ahead and give you all of that as a drive around the SEC is next here in the postgame show. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to report to you that might be causing some delays on the roadways here this rainy Wednesday afternoon. And we'll start off with some good news, and that is that an accident has been cleared over on I-20 westbound at Wilson Boulevard near exit 71. Again, I-20 westbound at Wilson Boulevard, exit 71. That accident has been cleared, so traffic's moving a little more smoothly through that area. We'll go start with some accidents that have recently been reported. One on Clemson Road at Old Clemson Road. That's causing some traffic delays, as well as one on Fair Road near Highway 555 at Killian Road. That one's been causing some traffic backup for a while, and just now an accident has the right lane completely blocked on I-20 eastbound at Two Notch Road near exit 74. That's right. It is time to take a drive around the SEC. We can go ahead and start off with the action that happened in Greenville earlier today. Georgia and Kentucky squared off in the SEC women's tournament, our first game of the day. The winner of that game was to take on Tennessee, and Georgia got off to a good start. Javin Nicholson, a first-team All-SEC player, got off to the start I expected her to. I was on with Tyler Head today on the Extra Point, and he asked, which of these bottom four seeds did I think had the best chance to maybe win a couple games and mess around and find themselves playing on Friday. I thought that might have been Georgia, just because they do play a very complicated matchup zone defense. It's taken them a while to understand, but they deployed it against South Carolina, and I thought that was their best game this year. And Javin Nicholson, their All-SEC performer, had like I said, an All-SEC season, and she dropped 27 and 12 rebounds here at CLA against South Carolina, and 3 of her last 5 games resulted in scoring outputs of 26 points or more. So I figured, maybe she can carry Georgia to a win over Kentucky, and then maybe, mess around and hang around against the Lady Vols enough to maybe scare them a little bit. After the first half of the first quarter, it seemed like that might be the case, but Kentucky took a 17-4 run. Into the second quarter, they end up leading by double digits at halftime, and after scoring 10 points in the first half, Javin Nicholson ends with 23 on 50% shooting with 3 assists. All that she had assist-wise was in that first half. Kentucky was able to pull away, and a big reason why was because they actually hit the three-pointers they attempted. Georgia was 0 for 11 from 3 and couldn't get anything going. And outside of Javin Nicholson, they didn't have another player score in double figures. Kentucky ended up winning pretty easily, 64-50. Georgia cut it down to about as little as 9 with 3 minutes left to go. Was able to force a turnover on a full court press, get the ball back, but then they turned it right back over. Kentucky turned that turnover into points, and they never relinquished that lead. Asia Petty had her 17th double-double of the season with 11 points and 14 rebounds. And then ultimately, Kentucky was able to pull away and advance. They will take on Tennessee tomorrow. So Tennessee and Kentucky will play 25 minutes after Texas A&M and Mississippi State square off. That's the 8-9 game. The winner of that game will play South Carolina, the 1 seed, the undefeated 1 seed and regular season champ. That game will be Friday, March 8th at noon. After the Georgia-Kentucky game, Missouri got to take on Florida. Poor Missouri this year, man. We'll get into the struggles on the men's side, but the men will finish 14th because they are winless. And the Missouri women are not much better, and by not much better, they have won whopping 2 more games than the men have. They go into the SEC women's tournament in Greenville, 2-14 in conference play. They had to play Leilani Correa, the SEC Sixth Woman of the Year in Florida, the Florida Gators, who were the 11 seed. Florida ends up winning 66-60. Missouri gave them a game. I think a game that I was not expecting them to have. They actually had the lead at the end of the first quarter, but Florida took a 29-10 second quarter and propelled them to a 16-point lead at the break. Missouri was able to mess around and make this a one-possession game late in the fourth quarter, but it was not enough. Correa off the bench, the sixth woman of the year, led the team for Florida in scoring 15 points on 7 to 12 shooting with 3 assists. And then for Missouri, Judd led with 17 points on 6 of 13 shooting with 7 rebounds. So Missouri and Georgia season's over. Florida advances. They will play Vanderbilt tomorrow night about 25 minutes after the Auburn and Arkansas game. So that's your slate for tomorrow. And, of course, all of our coverage of the SEC Women's Basketball Tournament brought to you by Cool Care, Heating and Air, Plumbing and Refrigeration. Good sponsors here. Looking forward to being back there tomorrow morning for the rest of the tournament, for day 2 of the tournament. The men's tournament not far away. That one will start a week from today. And like I mentioned with Missouri's men's team, they are winless. They are 0-17. They have that number 14 spot locked up. They're in the bad land of the locks. I mentioned South Carolina's men's team being in the land of the locks in terms of they are guaranteed into the NCAA tournament, and I feel pretty good about declaring that publicly. But Missouri is guaranteed to be the 14th seed in the SEC tournament. They got drubbed at home last night by 27 points to Auburn, and they are now one game away from experiencing that dreaded winless conference slate. They're 8-22 overall. They will play at LSU Saturday night at 8:30. And Godspeed, dudes, because you do not want to be in that 2018 Vanderbilt category of teams that go 0 in conference play. That Vanderbilt team, to this day, a team that I covered professionally. The first one I've ever really accused of quitting on a coach in the middle of a season. That all culminated in a 40-plus point loss to Arkansas at home that ended that season in a chorus of boos from the dozens of Vanderbilt fans in attendance. It was an ugly scene. Vanderbilt fired Bryce Drew. He did not survive that season, and now Vanderbilt is 3-13 in the SEC, 8-21 overall, and they pretty much have the 13th spot locked up. So maybe if we use history as our guide, maybe Dennis Gates, with this only being his second season, should survive this. I think he will. Even if they do go 0-18 and then get smacked in the first round of the SEC tournament, which more than likely they will be playing Georgia unless Arkansas is able to tie them on the last day of the regular season. Arkansas does host LSU tonight. If they're able to win that game, then they'll be tied with Georgia going into the tiebreaker final game of the season. But Georgia has to end their season at Auburn. So there's a good chance that maybe it is Arkansas playing Missouri, but whether it's Arkansas or Georgia, I like both of those teams to beat the soulless Tigers right now. So it's been a really tough year for them, but I still expect to see Dennis Gates as the coach next year. Maybe not get too eager on jumping the gun and firing, because I guarantee you with the success that Bryce Drew's having at Grand Canyon right now, Vanderbilt would love to have even just a smidge of that. Florida took down Alabama in impressive fashion last night to improve to 11-6 overall in conference play. Alabama again surrendering triple digits to a team, 105-87. Alabama, a team that loves to shoot a ton of threes, only shot 23 last night compared to 47 twos. They were still at over a point per possession, and Mark Sears still scored 33 points, but outside of Sears, nobody was really scoring efficiently. Florida was able to get whatever they wanted. They scored over 1.3 points per possession and led by as much as 81-58 with 7:19 to go in the second half. It was a total tail kicking. Walter Clayton, who hit 6 threes here on Saturday, only made 1 last night, but he still finished with 22 points because he got to the line 16 times. Florida shot 46 free throws compared to Alabama's 25. And when you watch the game, it's not an officiating snafu. I think we could all agree, for anybody who watched that game last night, Florida was way more aggressive with their guards on drives and did a really good job of getting into the paint and really showed the country, as if, Kentucky didn't do this to Alabama previously, or if many of the other teams that have scored 100+ on Alabama this season previously have shown that it can be pretty easy to get paint touches against this Alabama team, who is now losers of 3 of their last 4 going into a home finale against Arkansas. I mentioned Matt Norlander tweeted last night asking, how many games do you trust this Alabama team to win in the NCAA tournament? And my guess was approximately 1. Despite this team being the most efficient offense in college basketball by a country mile, they rank 106 in defensive efficiency. Can't stop a nosebleed right now. You ain't going to win in the SEC that way. You're not going to be able to advance to at least, you maybe get one or two teams, but you're not going to a Final Four defending that poorly. Kentucky's playing tonight. They play Vanderbilt. That's another good one in terms of standing implications. They're probably going to win that game. They'll put them at 12-5. They have the tiebreaker over Alabama, so that would put Kentucky with a win tonight in the top 4 in firm position to get a double bye. Auburn's also sitting at 12-5. They got a win last night. That was the one against Missouri, 101-74. They're in prime position to also finish in the top 4 because they have a home game against Georgia to end their season. So Auburn almost, I don't want to say land the locks for being a double bye in the SEC tournament just yet, but Auburn is in a much better position now than they were just a few weeks ago. Alabama is certainly flirting with disaster after that loss. I get your final thoughts on tonight's game between the Gamecocks and the Vols as the post-game show continues. Final segment here of the post-game show. Elijah Campbell here with you, going up until 6 o'clock. And I don't know if you looked outside, but it's raining. And that rain is resulting in what appears to be a rain delay. The South Carolina baseball team taking on Davidson this afternoon. No Steph Curry available for the Wildcats. Gamecocks lead 4-1, top of the 7th. No outs, but it looks like that result will not be final before we go off air because it's raining pretty hard out there. So we'll see if they're able to get the rest of the game in later today. Coming up here in a little over an hour and 10 minutes, so we'll say like 70 minutes, the Gamecocks and Vols will be tipping off at Colonial Life Arena. So I'll go ahead and get some final thoughts here of this matchup. We played a ton of sound from Lamont Paris and Rick Barnes even about how different these teams have been since they met on January 30th. The game was obviously the game that I felt legitimized South Carolina's SEC regular season title run. Yes, the Kentucky game before that was big, and yes, beating them down by 17 made a national statement, but in a year in which so many ranked teams, especially top 10 ranked teams, have been losing to unranked opponents on the road, I feel like it would be easy for the casual college basketball fan, or maybe the AP voter, if you will, to take that Kentucky game as a possible one-off. This has happened more this year in terms of top 10 teams losing to unranked teams on the road than any year, percentage-wise, in college basketball in recent memory. The Tennessee win on the road against a top 5 opponent, against a team that in the almighty net rate rankings, the ultimate sorting tool of the sport, sits at number 5. And now that Tennessee's ahead of Alabama, South Carolina can still claim that they have the best road net win. Well, just kidding, because Arizona leapfrogged them, and Arizona lost at home to Washington State. So Washington State has the best road net win this season. South Carolina has the second best road net win this season. But that legitimized it. A team that has been in top 5 of net almost all season long. It's been in the top 10 of the AP poll all season long, to win in their house at Thompson-Boling Arena when so many teams this year have gone to TBA and gotten completely smacked up, has been the number one reason that game, to me, is what legitimized South Carolina for the rest of the country. That showed that these guys are really for real. And for me, it was, maybe they're not just the most improved team in the SEC. They could possibly be the best team in the SEC if they're able to bring it like this night after night, if they're able to bring a defensive intensity like that night after night and away from Colonial Life Arena. Tennessee's a lot different. Since then, they're 8-1. Since that game, Zakai Ziegler has been averaging over 15 points and 7.7 assists per game since that loss that they had. He's also shooting above 40% from 3. Colin Murray-Boyles is a whole lot different than he was on January 30th. His role on this team is significantly different than it was on January 30th. And since that January 30th game, he has supplemented himself as arguably the best freshman in the conference. I know Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepard are going to get a lot of the SEC Freshman of the Year discussion, but Colin Murray-Boyles, I can almost guarantee, is going to be on the all-freshman team. And if you ask Buzz Williams, he thinks Colin Murray-Boyles is the best freshman in the SEC. And a lot of that comes from the results since then. Before that Tennessee game, Collins had 3 games of scoring over double digits, and only one of those was in an SEC game. That was against Arkansas. The other 2 were against Elon and Florida A&M. And since then, he goes for 16, 16, 31, 19, 13, 12, 8 in 26 minutes, and then 15 in the last game against Florida. He has developed as a passer from anywhere on the floor, and he's been the most reliable rebounder offensively and defensively on this team. He's grabbed at least 4 offensive rebounds in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of their last 6 games. At least 4 extra possessions Colin has created in 5 of the last 6. He has been the difference in terms of completely erasing rebounding advantages that teams like Texas A&M and Florida have had on the Gamecocks going into these last 2 matchups. They are the top 2 of the top 3 offensive rebounding teams in the country. It has not mattered because of Colin's development. So these teams are different. I think Madison touched on something that I think is going to be very valuable. You can't turn the ball over against this Tennessee team. But when I look at this matchup, Tennessee, while their defense is elite and they force a ton of turnovers, they're the best in the SEC at forcing turnovers. You got to be able to get some shots at the free throw line, because the biggest weakness in terms of Tennessee defense is they do have a tendency to get a little foul happy. Get them in foul trouble. Get to the free throw line. South Carolina can't be the number 14 team in free throw rate in the SEC like they are right now. They need to channel a little bit more of what they did in the Florida game and get a little crafty and getting yourself to the line. Colin Murray-Boyle shot 10 free throws last game. You're going to need him to shoot a lot of free throws tonight. You're going to need your guards to be aggressive, because that might be there for this Tennessee team. They are an aggressive defense. You can maybe take advantage of that. You also can take advantage of the boards. Tennessee is the number 4 defensive rebounding team in the country, but I think you can be active on the offensive glass. And as good as Tennessee is at making you shoot tough shots, you can get easier shots by grabbing offensive rebounds. But I think the biggest thing tonight is making sure Dalton Knecht has to settle for mid-range jumpers. He shoots a decent amount of them. He shoots 40% on those mid-range J's, and they're about worth 0.8 points per shot if you look at the math on this season. But there's not a team in the SEC that forces more teams to shoot a higher percentage of mid-range J's than South Carolina. If you can limit the good three-point looks that Tennessee has tonight, limit your turnovers, and keep this bad boy 64 possessions or less, you can win this game. I'm excited to see what happens tonight. If Tennessee wins, they have a share of the SEC regular season title. If South Carolina wins, they are a game away from clinching a share of the SEC regular season title. Let's get it. I hope to see CLA loud and proud, make it a raucous environment. I'm Elijah Campbell, and I will talk to you all tomorrow at 3 o'clock.